A crowded airplane cabin, the final moments before takeoff. A flight attendant, stressed and dismissive, grabs an old, worn duffel bag from the overhead bin. It won't fit. With a contemptuous laugh, she shoves it, then throws it onto the jet bridge floor outside. "Sir, your bag is non-compliant," she sneers at the quiet, unassuming black man in the window seat. She sees an old veteran, a nobody. She has no idea she just threw away the personal effects of a 4-star general. She has no idea she just assaulted the property of the United States Secretary of Defense. What happens next is not just a corporate nightmare. It's a national incident that will unravel families' careers and the carefully constructed life of the most powerful military official in the country. The air inside the cabin of Trans-American Airlines Flight 1422 from Washington to Charleston was thick with the familiar cocktail of recycled oxygen, cheap coffee, and low-grade anxiety. For General Marcus Thorne, the man currently serving as the 29th Secretary of Defense, the anonymity of Seat 12A was a luxury more precious than any private jet. He wore a simple gray polo shirt, worn-in jeans, and a faded baseball cap from a long-forgotten veterans reunion. To the world, he was a face on television, a stern voice in press briefings, a figure of immense power. Here, he was just a man trying to get home. Home in this case was not the sprawling D.C. residence, but the quiet soil of South Carolina, where his wife Evelyn was buried. It was the 5-year anniversary of her passing, a date he never allowed to be marked by official ceremony or public acknowledgement. This pilgrimage was his alone. His carry-on bag was the source of the current commotion. It was a simple olive-drab duffel, softened with age, its leather handles worn smooth by his own hands. It wasn't full of state secrets or classified documents. It held something far more valuable. Tucked inside a protective sleeve was Evelyn's leather-bound journal, its pages filled with her elegant script detailing their life together. Beside it, nestled in a velvet case, were his most cherished military decorations, including the Medal of Honor he'd earned in a firefight decades ago in a dusty, forgotten valley. He was taking them to her, a private report to his commander-in-chief of the heart. "Sir, this bag is not going to fit. The flight is completely full." The voice was sharp, laced with an impatience that grated on Marcus's disciplined calm. He looked up at the flight attendant. Her name tag read Kinsley. She was young, with a taut expression that suggested she was at the end of a very long rope. "I can assure you it will," Marcus said quietly, "if you just place it lengthwise. Sir, I've been doing this for 6 years. I know what fits," she snapped, yanking the duffel out of the bin with more force than necessary. The other passengers in the aisle shifted uncomfortably, averting their eyes. Kinsley wrestled with it for a moment, making a show of her struggle. Then with a theatrical sigh, she turned to the open cabin door. "This will have to be gate-checked," she declared loudly, as if he were a disobedient child. "Please be careful with it," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "The contents are irreplaceable." Kinsley met his gaze for a fraction of a second. She saw a middle-aged black man in worn clothes, his face etched with a tiredness she misinterpreted as weakness. She saw none of the authority that could command armies, only a passenger delaying her departure. A smirk curled her lips, a flash of pure, unadulterated disdain. "Everything's irreplaceable, sir," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Then, in a single fluid motion of petulant frustration, she turned and tossed the bag out of the aircraft's door. It didn't land gently on the jet bridge carpet. It hit with a sickening thud and tumbled onto the concrete floor below, several feet down. And then she laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was sharp enough to cut through the cabin's hum. a short derisive bark that said, "Problem solved." She turned back, dusting her hands together. Now, if everyone would please take their seats. The world narrowed for Marcus Thorne. The low murmur of the passengers, the hum of the auxiliary power unit, it all faded into a deafening roar in his ears. He didn't see a flight attendant. He saw a desecration. He felt the impact of that bag in his bones. He pictured the velvet case cracking the delicate clasp of Evelyn's journal, snapping her words, her memory being brutalized on a grimy tarmac. His training his entire life was a study in control. He had faced down enemy combatants, hostile foreign ministers, and congressional committees with the same granite composure. He summoned every ounce of it now. His hands resting on his knees did not tremble. His jaw did not clench. He simply looked at the space where his bag had been, then back at Kinsley, who was now fussing with a compartment latch, pointedly ignoring him. The man in the seat next to him, a young tech bro in a hoodie, leaned over. "Dude, that was messed up. You should file a complaint." Marcus offered a single slow nod. The cabin door was sealed with a pneumatic hiss, shutting him in, shutting the remnants of his private life out. As the plane began its pushback, Marcus Thorne closed his eyes. A complaint was an understatement. What was coming for Kinsley Vance, for Trans-American Airlines, and for anyone who stood in the way of recovering his wife's memory was a reckoning. And it would be delivered with the full, silent, and unstoppable force of the United States government. The 2-hour flight to Charleston was the longest of Marcus's life. He declined the drink service, staring out the window at the cloudscape with unseeing eyes. Every bump of turbulence felt like another careless jostle of his wife's memory. The flight attendant Kinsley moved through the cabin with a restored air of breezy authority. The incident already forgotten, a minor annoyance swatted away. She didn't give seat 12A a second glance. For Marcus, the silence was a crucible. His anger was a living thing, a cold, coiled serpent in his gut. It would have been easy to unleash it. He could have identified himself to the captain mid-flight. He could have had the plane met by an honor guard that would have turned Kinsley's blood to ice. But that was not his way. Rage was a blunt instrument. Marcus preferred a scalpel. Evelyn had always tempered his fire with her grace, and in her memory he would act with precision, not passion. Upon landing, he was one of the first to deplane. He walked to the gate agent's desk, his movements deliberate. The young agent was busy typing furiously. "Excuse me," Marcus said. The agent held up a finger without looking up. "One moment." Marcus waited. 30 seconds passed. A minute. He stood perfectly still, a rock in the stream of disembarking passengers. Finally, the agent looked up, annoyed. "Yes, my carry-on bag was removed from the aircraft Flight 1422 from DCA. I was told it would be here at the gate." The agent sighed a twin to Kinsley's earlier exasperation. "If it was gate-checked, it will be at baggage claim with the rest of the luggage." "Carousel 3. He was already turning back to his screen. The flight attendant threw it from the aircraft door onto the tarmac. Marcus stated his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I need it located immediately, and I need the full name of the flight attendant in charge of the forward cabin." This got the agent's attention. He finally looked at Marcus, really looked at him, but saw the same thing. Kinsley had a man of no apparent consequence. "Sir, I'm sure it wasn't thrown. Our staff are professionals. Please check baggage claim. Get your supervisor," Marcus said. It was not a request. The tone was so devoid of inflection, so heavy with implied consequence that the young man flinched. He picked up his phone and mumbled into it. Minutes later, a harried-looking supervisor appeared, her corporate scarf slightly askew. She listened to Marcus's story with a practiced, sympathetic frown, her head nodding in all the right places. "I am so sorry to hear that Mr. Thorne," he supplied. "Mr. Thorne, let me assure you that is not our standard of care. I'll put a priority trace on the bag right away. Can you describe it?" He did. She typed into her computer. "As for the employee's name, we can't release that information due to privacy policies, but I will personally file a report. It will be taken very seriously. We can offer you a $150 travel voucher for your inconvenience." The voucher. The corporate panacea for all ills, from a lost suitcase to a desecrated memory. Marcus looked at the supervisor, a woman just doing her job, following a script. He could see the path this was on, a labyrinth of forms, hold music, and hollow apologies culminating in a check for the depreciated value of a 30-year-old duffel bag. He gave a slow nod. "Thank you for your time." He turned and walked away, not towards baggage claim, but towards a quiet corner of the terminal. He pulled out his personal unlisted cell phone, not the hardened encrypted device he used for official business, but a simple smartphone. He scrolled to a single contact, Peterson. Colonel James Peterson had been Marcus's aide-de-camp for 6 years, a man whose loyalty was absolute and whose efficiency was legendary. He answered on the first ring. Sir Peterson's voice was crisp. He knew this was the personal line. The call was unusual. James Marcus began his voice low. "I'm in Charleston. I had an incident on a commercial flight. Are you all right, sir? Is there a threat?" Peterson's mind immediately went to security protocols. "I am fine. The threat was to my personal effects. A Trans-American Airlines flight attendant, a woman named Kinsley, forcibly removed my carry-on and threw it from the aircraft onto the tarmac at Dulles." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Colonel Peterson knew exactly what was in that bag. He had helped the general pack it himself once, years ago. "Sir, I am so sorry. I don't need apologies, James. I need action. First, I want that bag found. It's on the ground somewhere at Dulles. I want a quiet team to retrieve it. Use the airport authority, FAA, whatever you need. But be discreet. No uniforms, no sirens. Treat it like a misplaced piece of diplomatic luggage. Second, I want to know everything about this flight attendant. Kinsley. Flight 1422DCA to CHS, today's date. I want to know her full name, her service record, her home address, her family. Everything." "Understood, sir." Third Marcus continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "I want you to identify the Executive Vice President of Operations for Trans-American Airlines. Get their direct office line and private cell number. I don't want to talk to a customer service representative. I want to talk to the person whose career depends on their planes running on time and their employees acting like human beings." "It will be done," Sir Peterson said, the sound of keyboard clicks already audible. "I'll have preliminary information for you within the hour." "Thank you, James." Marcus hung up. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a threat. He had simply given a series of orders, activating a network of influence that Kinsley Vance and her supervisor could not possibly comprehend. The serpent of his anger was no longer coiled. It was moving silent and unseen through the digital and corporate veins of the world, and its destination was becoming clearer by the minute. He walked out of the terminal into the humid South Carolina air, a 4-star general on a personal mission, armed with a quiet fury that could shake an empire. Back in a secure office suite in the labyrinthine corridors of the Pentagon, Colonel James Peterson moved with the chilling efficiency that had defined his career. The Secretary of Defense's request was not just an order, it was a sacred duty. The contents of that bag were in their own way as vital to the nation's top military leader as any intelligence briefing. They were the source of his humanity, the anchor of his soul. Peterson's first call was to a contact at the Department of Transportation, who owed him a significant favor. Within 10 minutes, the Dulles Airport operations manager was being patched through his voice shaky at the unscheduled call from a Pentagon colonel regarding a misplaced sensitive item. Peterson was deliberately vague, letting the manager's imagination fill in the blanks with thoughts of state secrets or diplomatic snafus. A discreet ground crew was dispatched to the gate Flight 1422 had departed from. 20 minutes later, Peterson received a photo on his secure device, the olive-drab duffel scuffed and dirty lying forlornly on the concrete. A small dark stain marred one side. The bag was secured and sent via a priority courier to a secure military facility for assessment. Simultaneously, Peterson initiated the second part of his task. Accessing airline personnel records was technically a civilian matter, but Peterson knew the shortcuts. A formal request through the NTSB citing a potential security protocol breach by the flight crew was all it took. Within the hour, he had the file. Kinsley Amelia Vance, age 28, employed by Trans-American for 6 years. A commendation for customer service in her second year, followed by a string of minor disciplinary notes in the last 18 months. Abrupt, with passengers' unexcused tardiness, minor uniform infractions. A picture of a life fraying at the edges. A recent performance review noted she was showing signs of burnout and was struggling with the increased workload from post-pandemic travel surges. But it was the next section that made Peterson pause. Under emergency contact, the name listed was Desmond Vance, relationship father. A quick cross-reference in a corporate database brought up the hit. Desmond Vance was not just any executive. He was the executive vice president of North American operations for Trans-American Airlines, the very man Peterson had been tasked to identify. The situation had just escalated from an employee issue to a dynastic complication. Kinsley Vance was not just a disgruntled flight attendant. She was the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the company. This explained her sense of untouchability, her casual cruelty. She had a safety net woven from corporate power. Peterson forwarded the encrypted file to Marcus, adding a single line. "Sir, note the father's name." This complicates the corporate chain of command. Meanwhile, in his borrowed car heading towards the coast, Marcus received the file. He pulled over to the shoulder of the highway, the palmetto trees swaying in the breeze. He saw Kinsley's photo, the same taut face, the same entitled set to her jaw. Then he saw her father's name, Desmond Vance. Marcus knew the name. He had seen it on briefing documents about aviation infrastructure and logistics. He had probably shaken the man's hand at some forgotten industry gala. The realization settled in his gut like a block of ice. This wasn't just random incompetence. This was the arrogance of the protected, the carelessness of someone who had never faced a real consequence. His phone rang again. It was Peterson. "Sir, the bag is secure. We're having it flown to Charleston on the next available military transport. It should be with you in 3 hours. However, the initial assessment shows significant damage to the contents. The velvet case is cracked, sir. And the journal, it appears to have sustained impact and moisture damage. The courier said it looked like coffee." Kinsley's sneer, her dismissive laugh, the dark stain on the bag. Coffee. A final thoughtless insult. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The image of Evelyn's elegant handwriting, her private thoughts and gentle jokes bleeding and blurred by stale coffee, was more painful than any physical blow. "Thank you, James," he said, his voice strained. "Proceed as planned. Contact Mr. Vance's office. Arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning at 0900. Here in Charleston, at a neutral location. A conference room at the federal courthouse. Tell him it's a matter of national security." And his daughter, Sir Marcus, paused, thinking. He could have her fired. He could ruin her. But what would Evelyn have said? Show them what grace under fire really means, Marcus. Don't break them. Teach them. Yes, James Marcus said, finally. Tell him his daughter's presence is required as well. He hung up and sat for a long moment, the traffic rushing past him. He had thought this trip was about mourning his wife. He now realized it was about defending her, and in doing so, he would have to confront a kind of rot that was just as insidious as any foreign enemy, the corrosion of basic human decency protected by power and privilege. The meeting tomorrow would not be a negotiation. It would be a lesson. 200 miles away in a cluttered office in Charlotte, North Carolina, Avery Thorne was trying to save the world one hopeless case at a time. At 30 years old, she was a firebrand public interest lawyer working for a non-profit that championed tenants' rights and fought predatory lenders. Her walls were covered not with diplomas from her Ivy League law school, but with photos of protests, newspaper clippings of small victories, and a large framed poster that read, "The power of the people is stronger than the people in power." Her relationship with that last phrase was complicated, because the ultimate person in power was her father. Avery loved her father, but their connection was a fractured landscape of love and resentment. She remembered him as a ghost in her childhood, a man perpetually in uniform, always leaving or just returning from some unnamed place. His world was one of rigid order, classified secrets, and unquestioning patriotism. Her world was one of messy human problems, systemic injustice, and a deep-seated skepticism of authority. She saw him as a cog, albeit a very large and powerful one in the military-industrial machine she so often railed against. They argued always about foreign policy, about domestic surveillance, about the very definition of patriotism. The last time they'd spoken a month ago, it had ended with her yelling, "You don't see people, Dad. You just see assets and threats," and him replying in a clipped, hurt voice. "And you don't see the sacrifices required to keep you safe enough to protest." Her phone buzzed. It was her aunt, her mother's sister from Charleston. "Avery, honey, just wanted to let you know your father is in town." Avery's stomach tightened. "He didn't tell me he was coming." "Well, you know how he is about the anniversary," her aunt said gently. "He likes to be alone with his thoughts. But I just got the strangest call from a Colonel Peterson from his office. He said your father was involved in some kind of incident on the flight down. He wouldn't give details, just that your father was all right, but that a meeting had been called for tomorrow morning." Avery's mind raced. An incident. Her father was one of the most protected men on the planet. What kind of incident? Is he hurt? Peterson was very clear he wasn't hurt. But his voice, it sounded like steel Avery. "He asked me to reach out to you. He said your father might need you. My father might need me." The words felt alien. General Marcus Thorne, the man who moved armies, needed her. It was unthinkable. Her first instinct was suspicion. Was this some kind of paternal power play to get her to fall in line? "Thanks for letting me know, Aunt Carol. I'll think about it." She hung up and stared at the poster on her wall. The power of the people. Her father wasn't the people. He was power. But the call from her aunt, the mention of an incident, planted a seed of unease. Her father, for all his stoicism, was still a black man in America. Even as Secretary of Defense, he couldn't just take off his skin. Had someone said something? Done something? The anonymity he craved on these personal trips was a double-edged sword. It also stripped him of the deference his position commanded. She pulled up a news feed, searching for incidents at Dulles or on flights to Charleston. Nothing. It was being kept quiet, which meant it was serious. A memory surfaced one from years ago. She was 12, and they were at a diner. Her father, then just a major, had been explaining a map to her when a man at a nearby table made a crude racial remark. Avery had expected her father to explode to become the soldier. Instead, he had simply met the man's eyes with a look of such profound, silent disappointment that the man had stammered an apology and left. He hadn't used his power, only his presence. Was that what happened today? Had someone mistaken his quiet dignity for weakness? Avery felt a foreign protective instinct stir within her. Her battles were loud, fought in courtrooms and on picket lines. His were silent, fought in the Situation Room and perhaps in the cramped confines of an airplane cabin. For the first time in a long time, she felt a pull not to fight against her father, but to stand with him. She hated that the request had come through a colonel, a link in his chain of command. But the message itself, filtered through her aunt, felt personal. He might need you. She looked at her caseload at the stacks of files representing dozens of families facing eviction. Then she looked out the window, picturing her father alone in Charleston on the anniversary of her mother's death, dealing with some unknown insult. Her mother had been the bridge between them, the one who translated his silent strength for her and her fiery passion for him. With her gone, that bridge had collapsed. Avery sighed, the fight going out of her. She closed her files, canceled her morning appointments, and booked the first flight to Charleston. For once, she wasn't going as a lawyer or an activist. She was going as a daughter. She just wasn't sure what she would find when she got there. In his sprawling corner office, on the 52nd floor of Trans-American's Chicago headquarters, Desmond Vance was having a magnificent day. He'd just closed a lucrative new route expansion deal and was basking in the glow of his own perceived brilliance. Desmond was a man who believed firmly in the hierarchy of things, and he was comfortably near the top. He was handsome, silver-haired, and possessed a voice that could be either silken or menacing, depending on the needs of the moment. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Vance, your daughter is on line 2. Desmond's mood soured instantly. He loved Kinsley, but he loved her in the abstract as an extension of himself. Her recent career turbulence was an annoying blemish on his otherwise pristine record. He picked up the phone. "Kinsley. Everything all right, Dad?" "I think I messed up," she said, her voice small and trembling. It was a tone he hadn't heard since she was a teenager. "What is it now?" He sighed, impatience coloring his tone. "There was this passenger today, an old guy. His bag wouldn't fit, and I was so stressed, and he was being difficult, and I might have been rude. I tossed his bag out onto the jet bridge." Desmond pinched the bridge of his nose. "You what, Kinsley? We've talked about this. You have to maintain your composure." "What's the damage?" "Did he file a complaint?" "He did." And Dad. It felt different. He was so calm. It was scary. And now the Charleston station manager is calling me asking for a formal statement. They're saying the bag was damaged. Desmond leaned back in his leather chair. This was a nuisance, but manageable. "Okay, listen to me. It's fine. I'll handle it. I'll call down to Charleston, smooth it over. We'll offer the man a generous travel credit pay for his bag. Maybe upgrade him on his next flight. He'll go away. These things happen. The important thing is to control the narrative. You were following procedure for an oversized bag on a full flight. He was non-compliant. Got it." "Yes, Dad," she said, sounding relieved. "Good. Now pull yourself together. You're a Vance. We don't get rattled by cranky passengers." He hung up, already mentally drafting the email to the regional manager that would make this little problem disappear. Just another fire to extinguish. An hour later, his private assistant, a perpetually nervous man named Arthur, knocked and entered the office. "Mr. Vance, there's a Colonel James Peterson from the Department of Defense on your direct line. He says it's urgent." Desmond frowned. The DOD, it was probably about a military transport contract. He gestured for Arthur to put the call through, leaning back with an air of importance. "Desmond Vance speaking." "Mr. Vance," the voice on the other end said, and it was unlike any voice Desmond had ever heard. It was utterly devoid of emotion, yet carried the weight of a granite slab. "My name is Colonel James Peterson. I am the aide-de-camp to the Secretary of Defense." Desmond sat bolt upright. The Secretary of Defense. "Colonel, to what do I owe the honor I'm calling about an incident that occurred this morning on your Flight 1422 from Washington Dulles to Charleston? It involves a senior government official who was a passenger on that flight." The blood drained from Desmond's face. The casual nuisance of Kinsley's call suddenly transformed into a monster. "An incident? I was just made aware of a minor customer service issue." Mr. Vance, the colonel, interrupted, his voice cutting like glass. "The mishandling and deliberate damage of personal property belonging to a cabinet-level official is not a minor customer service issue. It is now a matter of national security concern." The phrase national security was a corporate kill switch. It bypassed all standard protocols and launched any issue into the stratosphere of absolute priority. I don't understand." Desmond stammered, his mind racing. "Which official? A deputy undersecretary, an assistant director." "You don't need to understand, Mr. Vance. You need to comply. The secretary requires a meeting. Tomorrow morning, 0900 hours. A conference room has been secured at the J. Watties Waring Federal Courthouse in Charleston. You will be there." Charleston. The flight, Kinsley. The pieces were slamming together in his mind with horrifying speed. "Of course, Colonel. I'll be there. I assure you, Trans-American takes this with the utmost. One more thing, Mr. Vance Peterson added, his tone becoming even colder, if that were possible. "Your daughter Kinsley Vance, the flight attendant involved in the incident. Her presence is also required." The phone line went dead. Desmond Vance stared at the receiver in his hand, as if it were a venomous snake. The entire world had shifted on its axis in the space of a 2-minute phone call. His bravado, his power, his carefully constructed universe of corporate dominance, it all felt like sand slipping through his fingers. He wasn't being asked to handle a disgruntled passenger. He was being summoned. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the generous travel voucher and a slick apology were not going to be sufficient. He was about to come face to face with a power far greater than his own, and his daughter had just thrown a rock at it. He slammed the phone down and yelled, "Arthur, get the company jet ready." Now, the J. Watties Waring Federal Courthouse was a place of solemn history, its halls echoing with the ghosts of landmark civil rights cases. Conference Room 2B, however, was intentionally devoid of character. It was a sterile, impersonal space, a long, gleaming mahogany table, a dozen imposing leather chairs, a pitcher of condensation-beaded water, and a single stoic American flag in the corner. It was a room designed for depositions and mediations, a place where messy human conflict was meant to be distilled into cold, hard facts. Marcus Thorne arrived first, moving with the quiet deliberation that defined him. He was not here as the Secretary of Defense flanked by aides and protocols. He was here as Marcus Thorne, a widower and a father, a man demanding a meeting on his own terms. On the polished table in the precise center of the space, he staged the evidence of the desecration. First, the olive-drab duffel bag. It lay limp and defeated the dark, ugly coffee stain, a prominent wound on its side. Next, he placed the velvet-covered box beside it. With a surgeon's care, he opened the lid, revealing the deep, jagged crack that ran through the wood. Inside the Medal of Honor lay slightly askew its brilliant blue ribbon and star-shaped emblem, a stark, noble contrast to the shattered case. Finally, with a breath he didn't realize he was holding, he laid down Evelyn's journal. It was warped from the moisture, the fine leather cover curled and stiff at the edges. He opened it to a page he knew by heart, one that described the day Avery, at 5 years old, had tried to help her mother bake a cake and ended up covered head to toe in flour. He remembered Evelyn's laughter, a sound like wind chimes, as she wrote about it that evening. Now her elegant flowing script was a chaotic watercolor, the words bleeding into unreadable feathery blurs. A memory once crystal clear, now permanently clouded. He closed it gently, the soft thud of the cover, a final painful punctuation. He sat his hands clasped before him and waited. The door opened 10 minutes later, admitting Desmond Vance. He strode in with the forced confidence of a man used to owning any room he entered his expensive suit, a silent testament to his station. But his eyes were tight with anxiety, and his movements were a fraction too sharp. Following him like a shadow was his daughter Kinsley. She was pale and drawn, her fashionable clothes looking like a costume she could no longer bear to wear. Her eyes immediately fell on the table, on the familiar duffel bag. A flicker of recognition, then pure, unadulterated horror washed over her face as she saw the state of it and the sacred items laid bare beside it. She looked as if she might be sick. Desmond, however, focused only on Marcus. He pasted on a mask of sincere gravity and extended a hand across the table. Mr. Thorne, I am Desmond Vance, Executive Vice President for Trans-American. I flew in this morning personally. On behalf of the entire airline from our CEO down, I want to offer my most sincere and profound apologies for what you experienced. Marcus did not stand. He did not acknowledge the offered hand. He simply met Desmond's gaze and gestured to the chair opposite him. Sit down, Mr. Vance. The command was so quiet, yet so absolute, that Desmond's hand fell limply to his side. The balance of power in the room, which he had tried to seize, had been effortlessly denied him. He and a trembling Kinsley took their seats. As I was saying, Desmond began launching into the well-rehearsed speech he'd been mentally scripting on the flight down. We are taking this with the utmost seriousness. An incident of this nature is completely unacceptable and does not reflect our values. I want to assure you a full top-down investigation into the matter has already been launched. Furthermore, Kinsley has been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending the results of that investigation. She is, of course, deeply and profoundly remorseful. We are prepared to offer you full and immediate monetary compensation for any and all damages, as well as a significant gesture of our corporate goodwill for the distress this has caused. Just as Desmond was about to elaborate on the nature of this goodwill, the conference room door opened again. Avery Thorne walked in, her lawyerly gaze sweeping the room, taking in her father's quiet stillness, the two strangers' anxious faces, and finally the heartbreaking display on the table. Her eyes locked on the cracked metal case, and her breath caught. She saw the ruined journal, and a fire ignited in her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice tight with concern. "Avery, thank you for coming. Marcus said, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "Please have a seat." She sat beside him, her posture radiating a protective energy that Desmond immediately misread. "Ah, and this must be your legal counsel," Desmond said, attempting a smile, trying to pivot. "Excellent. Well, as I was just explaining to your father, we are fully prepared to—" "I'm his daughter," Avery cut in her voice like ice. "And you should probably stop talking. You seem to be fundamentally misreading the nature of the damages here." Desmond's smile vanished. Flustered, he turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, as I said, we want to make amends. Let's start with the damage, and for your trouble, we would be honored to provide you and your daughter with complimentary first-class travel anywhere we fly for the next 5 years. A gesture of our apology." Marcus finally stirred. He picked up the warped journal, his thumb stroking the ruined cover. 5 years of first-class travel. He mused, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to make the very air in the room vibrate. He looked at Kinsley. "This journal. My late wife wrote in it every day for 30 years. This page here," he said, tapping the book, though the words were gone, described the afternoon she taught our daughter how to ride a bicycle without training wheels. It details her pride, her joy, her relief when Avery didn't fall. "Tell me, Mr. Vance, what is the check you'll be writing to compensate me for that specific memory?" Desmond stared at the ruined book, utterly speechless. Kinsley let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus then slid his hand over to the open box. He didn't touch the case. He lifted the Medal of Honor itself, holding it in his palm. "And this. Do you know what this is?" Desmond could only shake his head, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrible understanding that he was fathoms out of his depth. "It's the Medal of Honor," Avery whispered, her voice filled with a reverence she rarely showed for anything. "It was awarded for actions taken to save the lives of 3 members of my unit during a brutal ambush," Marcus stated, his voice now flat and hard as iron. He lifted his eyes from the medal and locked them onto Kinsley's. "One of them, a private first class, not much older than you are now, died in my arms while we waited for medevac. This medal doesn't really belong to me. It belongs to his memory. It belongs to the parents who were given a folded flag instead of their son. You didn't just toss a bag, Ms. Vance. You laughed while you threw away a piece of that young man's sacrifice." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Desmond Vance looked as though he had been physically struck. His corporate script, his power, his money, it was all meaningless ash in the face of the sacred history laid out on the table. He was a man who had brought a checkbook to a funeral. In the crushing silence, his entire world of calculated values collapsed. Finally, he managed to whisper the only question that remained. Who are you, Marcus?" Thorne said nothing. He simply sat there, the weight of his life's service and his deepest love displayed before him. It was Avery who answered. She stood up, not with the aggressive posture of a lawyer, but with the quiet, unshakable pride of a daughter finally seeing her father in full. All their arguments about policy and power faded into irrelevance. In that moment, she saw only the man, the husband, the soldier, the quiet hero. Her voice was clear, steady, and carried the force of a tectonic shift. "This is Marcus Thorne," she said, her gaze fixed on Desmond's. "And he is the United States Secretary of Defense." The words landed. Desmond Vance's jaw dropped, and the last vestiges of color drained from his face as the full, catastrophic, world-altering reality of the situation crashed down upon him. He and his daughter were adrift in an ocean of consequence, and they had just discovered the man they defended was the one who commanded the tides. The name spoken with such quiet finality by Avery detonated in the sterile conference room. The United States Secretary of Defense. It was not a title. It was a verdict. Desmond Vance, a man accustomed to commanding rooms and navigating crises, physically recoiled as if the words themselves had kinetic force. His face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of gray. The world he knew, a world of stock prices, operational logistics, and manageable HR issues, evaporated. He was standing in a new reality, one where the rules were written in a language of power he could not speak. His mind, usually a sharp instrument of corporate strategy, became a maelstrom of catastrophic thoughts. The board of directors, the inevitable media leak, the stock plummeting, the irreversible stain on the Trans-American brand, the utter annihilation of his career. He finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate rasp. "Mr. Secretary, I had no idea. This is inexcusable." "Kinsley," he snapped, turning on his daughter with panicked fury. "You're fired. Of course you're fired, effective immediately. We'll make a public statement. A significant donation to a veterans charity of your choice. We will do whatever it takes to make this right." He was throwing offerings at a god he had just discovered he'd offended, hoping one of them might appease the wrath he felt gathering over his head. Before Marcus could respond, Avery spoke her voice, cutting through Desmond's frantic promises with the sharp edge of a litigator. "Is that what you think this is about, Mr. Vance? A transaction. You think a donation can bleach the coffee stains out of a dead woman's memories? This isn't about bad press for your airline. This is about a fundamental failure of human decency, a failure that starts at the top." Marcus raised a hand, silencing them both. The room fell quiet again. The only sound Kinsley's ragged, continuous weeping. He bypassed the sputtering executive entirely and fixed his gaze on the broken young woman who had started it all. "Why did you laugh?" he asked again, his voice patient, searching. "I understand stress. I understand burnout. But the laugh, that was something else. I need to understand it." Kinsley looked up, her eyes red and swollen. The full, crushing weight of her actions had finally landed on her. She saw him now, truly saw him for the first time, not as an obstacle, but as a man she had deeply and personally wounded. It was superiority, she confessed the word, tasting like poison in her mouth. It felt like for 1 second I was the one in control. My life. It's rent. It's student loans. It's working double shifts. It's getting yelled at because the Wi-Fi is slow. It's feeling invisible. And you were just there, quiet. And I felt powerful, making you feel small. It was the ugliest part of myself. And I am so, so sorry. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. A horrible one. Her confession, raw and self-aware, hung in the air. Marcus absorbed it with a slow, solemn nod. He had seen that same corrosive need for petty power in young soldiers and seasoned politicians. It was a poison that knew no rank. He finally turned to Desmond, whose face was a mask of pleading terror. "You see, Mr. Vance firing her is the easy way out. It's a corporate maneuver. It allows you to cast her as a lone bad apple and pretend the tree isn't sick. It teaches her nothing, and it solves nothing." "But what do you want?" Desmond pleaded. "Want?" Marcus's voice was edged with a sorrowful steel. "I want a world where a man, any man, regardless of his station or the color of his skin, can travel without having his dignity assaulted for sport. I want a world where a flight attendant sees a passenger not a problem. Since I can't have that today, I will settle for accountability and education." He leaned forward slightly. "So no, you will not fire her. You will place her on a leave of absence, and during that time she will perform 200 hours of community service, not just any service. She will work at the Ralph H. Johnson VA Medical Center right here in Charleston. She will empty bedpans. She will read to blinded veterans. She will sit and listen to the stories of men and women who packed their own olive-drab duffel bags and left pieces of their souls scattered across the globe. She will learn that the things they carry, the visible and the invisible, are not non-compliant. They are sacred. He stood up the movement, signaling the end of the proceedings. He carefully repacked the broken metal case and the desecrated journal into the duffel bag. "As for Trans-American," he said, looking at Desmond, "I will not be making a public statement. I will not be calling for a boycott. But this story will be known in the right circles, and I will be watching very, very closely to see how you choose to reform the culture of overwork and disrespect that led to this moment. Fix your house, Mr. Vance. That is all." He zipped the bag closed, the sound echoing like a gavel in the silent room. He gave Avery a small nod, and she stood with him. They walked to the door, a united front. As they stepped into the hallway, leaving the Vances to drown in the wreckage, Avery's composure finally broke. She leaned against the cool marble wall, taking a deep breath. "I can't believe you did that," she said, her voice a mix of awe and confusion. "You had them. You could have destroyed their lives with a single phone call. Why didn't you—" Marcus stopped and looked at his daughter, his eyes filled with a deep, ancient weariness. "Your mother used to say that true strength wasn't about the power you use, but the power you restrain. Destroying them would have been about my anger. This was about honoring her memory. There's a difference." The drive to the cemetery was quiet, but it was a new kind of quiet between them, not the silence of distance, but of shared gravity. At the gravesite, under the dappled shade of the live oak, Marcus knelt and placed the bag on the grass. He unzipped it one last time and took out the journal, tracing the blurred, illegible lines of Evelyn's handwriting with his fingertip. "I failed you, Ev," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I let the world put its grubby hands on this, on you." Avery knelt beside him, her usual fiery activism replaced by a profound stillness. She placed her hand over his. "No, Dad. You didn't. You showed them what she meant to you, what she stood for." She paused, then confessed. "All these years I saw your uniform, your job as this wall you built to keep us out. To keep me out. I thought you chose it over us." Marcus looked from the grave to his daughter's face, seeing the same questioning eyes he'd seen since she was a little girl. "I'm the one who built the wall, Avery, not the uniform. I didn't know how to be a father and a soldier at the same time. I remember missing your 16th birthday. I was in a briefing in Brussels. Your mom sent me a photo of you smiling with the cake she made. I carried it in my pocket for the rest of the trip just to feel close to you. I'm sorry for that empty chair, for all the empty chairs." Tears streamed down Avery's face now, washing away years of resentment. "I just saw the chair. I never thought about the man in Brussels holding the picture." She looked at the grave. "Mom was the bridge, wasn't she? She translated you for me and me for you. When she was gone, the bridge fell." Marcus wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "And I was too lost on my side of the canyon to figure out how to build it back." Avery leaned her head against his shoulder, the gesture erasing a decade of distance. "Then let's build a new one," she whispered. "Plank by plank, together." He held her tightly, the father and daughter, finding their way back to each other in the quiet presence of the woman who was their compass. The duffel bag sat beside them, no longer just a container of broken things, but a testament to a love that could endure, and a catalyst for a family that against all odds was beginning to heal. What you just heard isn't just a story about an airline incident. It's a story about hidden dignity and the truth that we never truly know the battles the person next to us is fighting. General Marcus Thorne wasn't looking for special treatment. He was just a husband on his way to visit his wife's grave. The laughter of that flight attendant was an act of casual cruelty, but it led to a powerful lesson. Respect is not reserved for those whose importance is obvious. It is a fundamental human right. This story reminds us that behind every face is a history, a love, a loss. It's a powerful call for empathy in a world that often feels rushed and impersonal. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that explore the depths of human character. What would you have done in the secretary's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. The